It's really a great pleasure to have Randy Milch here and have him open up this the second day of the conference. Randy is the Executive Vice President of Public Policy and the General Counsel of Verizon, and in that capacity he leads the company's legal, regulatory, state government affairs, and security groups, and he also has overall responsibility for Verizon's global public policy activities, communications, and media relations. Randy became General Counsel in October of 2008, and he took on his current role, his current added responsibilities for global public policy, communications, and media relations earlier this year in January 2013. He has been with Verizon and Bell Atlantic for a while. He began his in progressively more responsible positions. He began his telecom career as counsel to the Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Company of Maryland in 1993, and prior to his role with Bell Atlantic, he was a partner in the Washington, D.C. office of Donovan, Leisure, Newton, and Irvine, and prior to that, he was a clerk to Clement Hainsworth of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Randy is also a trustee of the NYU Law School and the Citizens Budget Commission, and director of the National Veterans Legal Services Program and the National Chamber Litigation Center, and he is also on the National Advisory Board of the Constitutional Sources Project, and he tells me he's also going to mention Schumpeter in his talk. So it's a pleasure to introduce Randy.
Thank you, Tom, for that very kind introduction. It's wonderful to be here. I'm certain that an 8:15 keynote is worse for you than for me. But it's all to do with the fact that this is such a wonderful conference, and the beauty of Aspen, and the great folks here who I know perhaps drink into the night together, because that's what policy people do. I will talk a little bit about Schumpeter. I did reread him on the way out, as I'm sure all of you did. A little bit of a gloomy Gus from my perspective, so I was a little depressed by the time I got here. But there were some great little excerpts, some of which talking about intellectuals, some about economists. We won't go into those, but I leave it to you to go search those out from Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, which is now fully highlighted on my iPad. I do want to talk a little bit about creative destruction and regulation, which I think is something that needs to be talked about, because when you have creative destruction in a highly regulated part of the world, you naturally get into this. I hope that's a Verizon phone. You naturally get into the questions of how the two interact. And it seems that every week we see a spate of news around television, cable, and broadband, content owners and creators, headlines like Sony grabs lead in race for internet pay TV, and customer class action suit filed in Time Warner CBS dispute, and Roku beats Apple TV in homes with streaming media devices. Amazon orders 2 TV pilots, and this one I really like, cable channel bundling will end badly. So what does all that tell you? It tells me that these are exciting times for all participants in the internet ecosystem. My own view, personally, is that we should, all of us, revel in the storm that is swirling around us, because, as Schumpeter said, creative destruction is the powerful lever that in the long run expands output and brings down prices. Now, there are many strategies for weathering the gales of creative destruction. Some, in fact, may look for a policy or regulatory flotsam or jetsam and cling to it as a business preserver. My own view is that history and experience shows that these sorts of tactics aren't especially useful. And I propose that the best course is to let the storm play out with a minimum of recourse to the authorities that govern our antiquated regulatory structures. In the internet ecosystem, we have experienced wave upon wave of disruption, wreaking havoc on a technology or enabling consumers to wreak havoc on a business model. In other industries, disruptive innovations like the cotton gin or the automated manufacturing line seem to be few and far between. But not in our industry. We do things fast. Think about the innovations in broadband networks, from dial-up internet access to DSL to cable and fiber to the home, and now to mobile broadband, all of this taking place in about 20 years, and each of these developments wreaking a seismic shock to the established order. The first consumer email account was created in 1992, and by 1995, companies like AOL, Prodigy, and CompuServe were offering consumers access to the text-centric internet. 28K and 56K modems couldn't handle sound or video well, but the 1996 Telecommunication Act reforms, after some corrections by the courts, opened a flood of investment and competition in the internet access service market and spurred innovations and investments in networks. Higher speeds and the IP-based World Wide Web have made the old wireline switch circuit network essentially obsolete, and has brought new waves of disruption for those of us in the telecommunications space. Competition in voice service via VoIP emerged. Wireless voice and text replaced untold billions of voice conversations, and further innovations around broadband speeds, capacities, and applications brought insurgent communications platforms such as video conferencing, Skype, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, it goes on and on. Voice traffic over the PSTN dwindles daily, yet it is obvious that those embracing the internet ecosystem are not communicating less. They are simply communicating in different ways. The period in the late 20th and early 21st centuries was not an easy one for so-called phone companies. And more than a few Wall Street analysts and futurists were pointing Verizon in particular to the elephant graveyard. That might have been the case had we simply let the waves of disruption crash over us, but in broadband and in wireless, we saw an opportunity to innovate, and in 2006, we started investing billions of dollars in an all-fiber network to the home, capable of gigabit and better speeds. And a couple of years later, we would purchase the mobile spectrum that now serves as the rocket fuel for our 4G wireless broadband network, which I believe may prove to be the most disruptive platform of all. To compete and offer consumers new and innovative products and services, other companies made similar decisions to invest in the U.S. network deployment, and to the tune of more than $1 trillion of investment in only a decade. This investment is the irreplaceable foundation for the explosion of new applications and services we are seeing. The result is a remarkable broadband marketplace that is a transformative technology by itself, and which importantly also enables the introduction and adoption of other transformative technologies that are touching nearly every aspect of industry in our lives. Virtually every industry and business model has dealt with some form of disruption from the broadband internet. Voice, the postal service, brick and mortar commerce, advertising, the publishing industry, the recording industry, the movie industry, the list goes on and on. Broadband speed and capacity have particularly affected the media industry. The ability to download or stream large data files, the rapid decrease in the cost of storage and corresponding increase in computing power, the advent of innovative devices and platforms from the iPod and iTunes to tablets and smartphones and digital cameras, and the widespread use of peer-to-peer networks like the reviled BitTorrent protocol and video streaming platforms such as YouTube, they were all unleashed, and again, in less than a decade. Schumpeter wrote that revolutions reshaping the existing structures result in an avalanche of consumers' goods. And that is true here as well, although with a slight twist. I think that the most disruptive force the internet ecosystem has unleashed isn't any particular technology, it's the rise in consumer control over technology. All of the creative aspects of the video marketplace in the broadband era have empowered consumers, giving them more control and diminishing the control of long-established content creators and distributors. That said, in this age of empowered consumers, the cable and broadcast industries remain important sources of valuable content. They are adapting to the new digital reality by a delicate slicing and dicing of the distribution pie through both internet and traditional video distributors. But they do so with insurgents at the gate. Aereo and its web-delivered local broadcast TV will be a considerable threat to established revenue streams. There are numerous so-called over-the-top streaming platforms like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and Redbox Instant that now compete vigorously for consumer dollars and eyeballs. Through subscription models that bypass traditional pay TV, internet streaming platforms like Google and Apple TV and YouTube, Dailymotion, Vimeo, Facebook, game consoles like Xbox. This whole speech is a litany because there are so many of these things. Combine commercial content with massive amounts of user-originated data that is uploaded via the broadband networks from all those high-def cameras, tablets, and smartphones, and all seemingly free of charge. These OTT platforms eat away at the demand for traditional forms of media by siphoning off viewers looking for new forms of entertainment and those no longer willing to pay full freight for conventional cable subscriptions. All of these creative and even democratizing forces have empowered consumers while upturning and roiling just about every long-standing business and economic model in the content industry. For more than half a century, the TV and broadcast industry was largely based on an advertising model. Free TV in exchange for programming containing advertisements. Cable changed that somewhat with the addition of many more channels in the exchange for subscription fees and in some cases a share of the advertising revenue. But broadband, IPTV, and the host of over-the-top innovations we're seeing today allow consumers to customize their viewing experience. No longer tied to a schedule set by the broadcasting networks or cable programmers, consumers are recording, time-shifting, and streaming content without viewing advertising at all. Increasingly, consumers are shifting to IP-based content that is delivered through gaming consoles and internet gateways like Apple TV, Roku, and Google Chromecast. Wireless has further created new opportunities for consumers to access and create and to cord cut. And these trends are even more pronounced among millennials who have grown up with all these innovations, who view entertainment and content differently from their parents, and even more time-shifting, more mobile, more user-generated content is the lifeblood. I know of my daughters, and I assume many of you have 20-somethings see the exact same thing in your own homes. And this despite the fact that they have somewhat confusing ideas about privacy and copyright ownership and paid versus free. It's all a very confusing thing for these 20-year-olds. I am convinced, by the way, that the only way this will be solved is by the folks who are young enough to solve it. And we're not the right generation to solve these problems. We have to let them solve these problems. The challenge of all of us splashing around in these waves of innovation, the so-called incumbents, the upstarts and the insurgents, the mobile innovators and investors, the consumers, and even the policymakers, is to find the right approach to navigate the destruction in order to fully participate in the benefits of the creative process. In our economic system, pain is inexorably linked to gain. There is a tendency among some players in the internet ecosystem, however, to not fully embrace this process. They try to reap the benefits of creative destruction without the pain. And to paraphrase the economists Michael Cox and Richard Alm, they try to avoid all the pain. And who can blame them? But as Cox and Alm note, the process of creating new technologies or industries does not go forward without sweeping away the pre-existing order. And that brings me to an observation about the one area where there has been little or no creative destruction, the regulatory structures that many of us in this room deal with every day. Despite the huge technological changes that have transformed the lives of Americans, we are dealing with a pre-internet world in terms of the 1992 Cable Act and the 1996 Telecommunications Act. This regulatory discontinuity has all the appearance of a regulatory safe harbor from the gales of creative destruction, holding out the promise that a regulator will intervene in the process to prevent dislocation and economic hardship that accompanies the changes wrought by innovation. While completely understandable, I believe that appeals to antiquated regulation will actually hinder the continued growth and evolution of the internet ecosystem. And here's why. First, I believe it will hinder the virtuous cycle of investment and innovation that we have been witnessing. Tens of billions of dollars are being invested in annually to maintain and upgrade advanced global backbone data networks and to deploy 4G LTE mobile broadband networks, all with the goal of spurring new speed and capacity innovations and expanding access to the internet. This flow of investment will be increasingly important in the coming years as video traffic grows exponentially. And as we have seen, investments in our wired and wireless infrastructure are the foundation on which the multi-trillion-dollar internet economy is based. Yet some industry players are trying to place a regulatory thumb on the scale to advance their own business models. The current debate over internet interconnection is a good example. Peering, transit, and other forms of internet interconnection have always been largely unencumbered by regulatory interference and driven instead by commercial negotiations premised on a mutual exchange of value. Depending on the relative amount of traffic being exchanged, a company may seek interconnection through settlement-free peering, where no money is exchanged, or through negotiated paid interconnection arrangements. Some video distributors, however, believe that the networks they connect with should in essence be required to provide them unlimited capacity for free, regardless of the traffic flows and the associated costs. The important point here, and policymakers have so far agreed, isn't the details of any particular interconnection arrangement, but the importance of allowing these relationships to evolve through commercial negotiations and technical innovations, such as those offered by Verizon and Netflix that bring large flows of internet traffic deeper into a network and share the costs of delivering better service to mutual customers. The growth of new video models and the ability of technology companies to compete in the global marketplace is on page 14. Not on page, there it is, you see? There is a little danger in the 815, my apologies. Let's start over again on page, forget it. Inserting the FCC into the negotiating process or converting all interconnection arrangements to a settlement-free basis would disincent investment in the networks, skew the market for these intermediate network services, and create a free ride for video distributors that clearly benefit from the robust networks that have been created. In a period where it's clear that we need more network capacity and not less, we should be finding ways to jumpstart investment, not hinder it. Secondly, an overly regulatory approach will hinder the global growth of the internet ecosystem. The dramatic growth in video traffic is not a US phenomenon, it's a global trend. And not surprisingly, we have policymakers around the world focused on a number of debates about cloud services, privacy, and cross-border data flows that could dramatically influence the growth of new video models and the ability of technology companies to compete in the global marketplace. Last December at the World Conference of International Telecommunications in Dubai, we witnessed unsuccessful efforts by some policymakers to impose international telecommunications regulations from the rotary phone era on broadband. Others sought rules mandating cross-border data termination payments, and still others have been seeking to protect or advance their countries' or regions' cloud services businesses from global competition by raising concerns based on perceived differences in privacy protections. Such new layers of global regulation and restrictions would hinder consumers' access to new sources of content, whether used to advance free speech or entertainment, education or healthcare, or myriad other emerging services. These efforts to lean on regulatory intervention hinder the growth of internet-based economies in the very countries and economies that could benefit the most from robust and frictionless data flows. The pro-innovation approach requires increasing access to cross-border content and video traffic, not limit it. And many in this room, like Ambassador Gross, played a critical role in minimizing the damages of the Dubai wicket, and they deserve our thanks. In global forums and trade treaty negotiations, the U.S. has a great story to tell and a public policy track record to share about the role innovation and investment play in the internet ecosystem. The trade agreement now being negotiated between the U.S. and Europe is an opportunity to do just that and will serve to spur new growth in the global innovation economy. However, greater reliance on regulation in the video marketplace, and particularly in the markets for over-the-top and cloud-based services, will undercut such efforts. Third, we are well past the inflection point that empowered consumers and made them central to the internet ecosystem. Turning to regulatory or old business models won't change that. Yet we are seeing instances, particularly in disputes over content distribution, where ancient, and I use that term in internet time, ancient regulations designed to help broadcasters deal with a single distributor in a given community, must-carry rules, network non-dupe rules, blackout rules for regional sports, and exclusivity rules for syndicated content, are having an interesting effect on consumer choice. In these disputes, some broadcasters understandably rely on these rules to recoup revenues lost to the creative destruction in the video marketplace. Meanwhile, cable providers seek to hold down the soaring costs of content acquisition and are refusing to pay for what they perceive as revenue declines broadcasters are incurring elsewhere. The result is the impasse we see in retransmission disputes. The tit for tat has escalated to the point that some broadcasters have tried to deny access to their internet content, even to consumers who don't use the opposing cable company for video services. I would point out that an ISP denying access to content in the same way to gain commercial advantage in an unrelated dispute would be met with a net neutrality complaint in about a New York minute. I just put that there. Goes a long way to prove why it's so important to only have ISPs be subject to the net neutrality rules, I guess. For all the attention these disputes garner, this situation does not appear to rise to a consumer crisis that in the dog days of August has stirred some to call for regulatory or congressional action. Consumers are being inconvenienced, yes, but no one is yet taking to the streets or to Twitter over their inability to watch more Big Bang Theory. Technology empowers consumers and content owners to find alternatives, and they seem more than capable of finding the content they want or ways to distribute it, even if an outlet is blocked. Perhaps not surprisingly, customers who really want that content find a way to get it legally or otherwise. For instance, since the content cutoff, one of CBS's most watched shows, Under the Dome, saw a spike in illegal downloading via BitTorrent. For instance, in New York City, the relative piracy rate for the show more than doubled from about 1% of all US downloads to 3% as a result of the cutoff. To be clear, content providers should be compensated for the investment they have made in their products, just as video and cable service providers should be compensated for the investments made in their products and services. But every storm, gale, and process does not require a regulatory fix. If these sorts of disputes help move the ecosystem along and without too much inconvenience and distortion to the marketplace, and the end result is an erosion of anachronistic regulatory structures and the replacement of it with a more market-based framework, that would be a positive outcome for all. And why do I say all? Because it's not at all clear to me that the broadcasters themselves are really in the end benefited by reliance on these old rules. They have valuable content. If these rules were gone and they were forced to rely on new business models and new marketplace efforts, they may in fact be benefited by the new regime as opposed to the old one. It's important that policymakers and industry players from across the internet ecosystem continue to reinforce policies that have worked well. If the growth of the internet ecosystem has confirmed anything, it is that consumers want choices, quality of service, and security. Businesses, business models, and regulations that restrict choices, inhibit innovation, or hinder privacy and security tend to find themselves on the wrong side of history. In the end, we need to embrace the creative destruction that is taking place within the video marketplace and the broader internet ecosystem, not just in the US, but globally. We should not let regional differences and obsolete or restrictive policies undermine innovations in video. And we must embrace the rise of the consumer that the internet ecosystem has enabled. Are there challenges we must address? Absolutely. But now is not the time to cling to outmoded rules or business models, or to push for unnecessary or burdensome regulations out of a fear of disruption. With great innovations and opportunities on the horizon, we should continue to focus on the needs of the consumer and those policies that will ensure the ongoing growth and innovation of this remarkable internet ecosystem that we have all helped to create. Thank you. Tom is going to serve as my gatekeeper for questions.
So, questions?
Yeah.
There's no controversy.
There you go. Well, thank you very much. You mentioned during your speech that you thought that 4G, I assume that's LTE in the case of Verizon, may be the most disruptive mechanism that you've seen. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm asking in part because obviously this is one of the global new technologies, and I'd like to see what you're seeing actually now that you've implemented it nationwide.
Well, I think the reason that I think that it's going to be the most disruptive is that the enablement of mobility has unleashed just a whole nother dimension of innovation. Things that we used to do when you were sitting in one place, in your office, in your home, we are seeing just a huge advance in applications in the mobile space. So I believe it's going to be very disruptive by adding that mobility dimension. We're seeing a huge uptake in our 4G LTE traffic. We now have over 50% of our data traffic is LTE traffic in only a little over a year. We're seeing a great rise in the Share Everything plans that we introduced earlier this year. So it's a great success, and I think that and our customers in particular are benefiting from the speeds, the reliability, and the new applications that are coming out about it. So I think that's why, and I think you're right. Since it is a global standard, I think that there will be enhanced opportunity for global usages of the technology. Obviously, for travelers like yourself, who will be able to benefit from it once there's some build out in the rest of the world. But I think that it foretells, with its greater efficiency, greater speed, and the ability to do things on the go, just a very large new source of innovation.
Preston?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for your investment in your 4G network and congratulate your company and hope that the government doesn't punish you and AT&T for building the best networks that do the greatest service for consumers. You mentioned some broadcast rules, network non-dupe, must carry. They date back to the early 70s, and they were part of a package that included the compulsory copyright license. The then fledgling cable industry was deemed incapable of negotiating for program rights. And the rules you mentioned were all adopted to ameliorate the impact of that compulsory license. And I frequently hear cable and telephone and satellite people talk about getting rid of those rules that were designed to ameliorate the impact of the compulsory license. I never hear the same folks talk about repealing that compulsory copyright license.
So that's a great question. First of all, let me thank you, Preston, for bringing together the coalition of the willing in the upcoming incentive auction. Without your leadership, we would not have the possibility of having all of this spectrum potentially available, as long as this auction goes off in a way that incents many people to, incents the money flows that are going to be necessary to fully and fairly compensate the broadcasters for being willing to put their spectrum into the auction. So I think we need to make sure that the money's there for the broadcasters, and I think the way to do that is, in fact, not to have any unnecessary restrictions on anyone who can bid. I think that's a very important aspect of that auction. I believe you're right. I don't think it makes sense to deal with all those rules and not deal with the compulsory license. My view is that the marketplace ought to be able to deal with this, and the marketplace has to deal with it on both ends. So I agree with you. And my absence of putting it in there is apology. No one seems to be relying on the compulsory license in the same way, but I agree it was all part of a package, and if you get rid of the package, you should get rid of the package.
Hi, thank you for speaking with us today, and Tom, thank you for persevering. I'm Ed Hurst, and a Verizon customer. I wanted to ask you about your remark on over-the-top services. You mentioned things like the video services like Netflix, but I wonder if you could comment on some of the voice and text messaging over-the-top services, particularly in the context of your answer to David's question about LTE networks. That'll obviously facilitate those. And so how do you balance that? They're competition, but they're also taking advantage of your new network. Just, if you could share your thoughts of that, it'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that certainly in our core 700 spectrum, 700 megahertz spectrum, that is really the basis of our foundation of our LTE network. We have obligations, non-discrimination obligations, which would prevent us from discriminating against an app that rode in the data network and provided texting or any of those other aspects. So we're fully comfortable with the fact that there's going to be a lot of folks wanting to use our systems, our data capabilities for all sorts of apps. We're happy to have people do it. It's all usage, and that's what the network is there for, to be used. So we're happy to have those apps running on top, even if they're competitive with our own apps. I don't think that that's any sort of a problem philosophically or financially for us. I think that it makes the most sense. So we're happy to have the network full of all those apps, and which is our obligation under the 700 block, and which is what we said we would do when we published our own standards about our open network standards, about how we would approach those things. So I think I'm hopeful that there was all sorts of innovation associated with that, with the capabilities that the LTE network is unleashing.
Hey, Harold Feld with Public Knowledge. So you touched on the PSTN transition, which I want to thank you for, because I've been a little surprised at how what is probably the most interesting example of creative destruction has not really been a subject of much discussion. But you know, Fire Island has become something of the face of the PSTN transition at the moment, because it's where we're seeing an actual copper line substitution. There has been a lot of back and forth. Certainly, I've contributed a lot of back and forth on this.
I want to thank you for that.
Yes. Just doing my job. But the real question, I think, for all of us is, how do you see moving forward, particularly on the copper to wireless substitution? The FCC, I think, has asked a lot of good questions, particularly with regard to how do you measure the technical standard with regard to whether the voice is, simply the dial tone is an adequate substitution. There's concerns about the loss of certain associated services, the inability to get DSL in some of these places. Where do you see VoiceLink moving forward from here, and how do you see this, what is clearly going to have to be some regulatory balancing between the expectations of subscribers with regard to the service that they're getting and the transition to these new technologies?
Okay. Thank you for that. It is an important question. I would note that we began the process of trying to figure out how to evolve our network years ago. It's apparent that if you look at the different ways that we enable our customers to communicate with one another, the old copper network has frailties that newer networks like fiber and wireless do not have. And that if you're going to consider the massive investments that Verizon makes every year to enable its customers to communicate, moving our customers' communications over fiber, over wireless, as opposed to continual reinvestment in a copper network that degrades, deteriorates, and is very expensive to maintain, makes all the sense in the world. So that was our initial view. We created VoiceLink particularly for the purpose of providing our customers with an option to, in instances where they had degraded copper or they were satisfied with a wireless product, to move to a wireless product and give them that alternative. VoiceLink is a tremendous product. It's basically a wireless link out of the home, but you can plug your inside wire into this very simple box, and all of your inside phones become active. So it's basically transparent to you inside the house. You can pick up any phone that you have and use it just like you had. 911 is taken care of, and the basic aspects of that are taken care of. So it's a good, innovative product. Then Sandy came along. And so VoiceLink was not created to deal with Sandy. VoiceLink was created to deal with something else. But when you looked at the economics of Fire Island, which I agree has become to be a little bit of a flashpoint, which I think is unfortunate because it's a peculiar set of circumstances associated with it. When you considered the dollars that would be involved in recreating a copper network on a barrier island, and where salt air does what it does to copper every day of the week, or the costs associated with putting in fiber to but is essentially a seasonal community where you have 300 permanent, more or less permanent residents, and about 1,500 residents who only take service the 3 months of the year. The payback on wireline investment is, let's say, it's long. And we had this alternative product, VoiceLink, and so we wanted to bring out VoiceLink. Now, to the extent that there are any actual issues with the VoiceLink product not being suitable for voice services, which is what it's designed to do, we're going to fix that. We're not going to have someone not be able to make a voice call on Fire Island due to VoiceLink. We understand that there are issues associated with broadband on this island, which happens to be a barrier island that does not have competitive alternatives for broadband service. So we're going to try to ameliorate those issues as well for our customers on Fire Island. We don't want to create a group of unhappy customers, but I would stress that trying to extract a lesson about network evolution from Fire Island, in my judgment, is simply a mistake. It's a very sui generis set of circumstances, and we have to make sure our customers are satisfied on Fire Island, but we also have to take account of the fact that it's a very expensive place to build a lot of wires for a very small population. I would note, Harold, one other thing, that Fire Island isn't the first place that we have moved away from a copper network. You know, we have very, very quietly and assuredly, just completed our third major wire center where we have moved everyone to fiber. We did this in a place in Texas, and a wire center in Texas, one in Florida, and we have, after Sandy again, moved one of the largest wire centers in the country, our Broad Street Wire Center downtown, entirely to fiber services. So, we have been evolving the network. We will continue to evolve the network. Our vision for VoiceLink is an option, and I urge that that we again really take a hard look and think about why it is that we would continue to invest in copper where other potential services are more robust, more effective. Nothing is perfect. There is no, even the copper service is never 100% perfect. It goes out in a storm too. So I think that we need to sort of step back and take a view of this whole thing and not let Fire Island wag the much more important network evolution dog.
I'm interested in your view on programming costs. Sports as a percent of the bundle is about twice its total viewing, and the bundle economics on the programming in general are rising about 2 to 3 times as fast as you can pass through the programming price increases. I'm interested in your view specifically on sports. Do you think it should be structured like Canada, where it's a premium bundle on top of the basic entertainment bundle? And how do you think how do you get programming costs in line, or do you just foresee margin pressure in the video product kind of for the foreseeable future?
So if I delve deeply in this, my CFO will call me up immediately and tell me I've strayed across my lines here. We did institute a sports fee, a separate sports fee of $2.40 odd, I believe, and at the same time introduced a tier of service that had no sports in it at all. Right, so people had a choice at Verizon to pay a little bit extra for sports, for a sports fee, a regional sports fee, or decide they didn't want to take sports, or they didn't want to take sports from us, and to have that option. I think that from what I can tell, the polling seems to show that about half the populace thinks they could live without sports, and the other half of the populace would be in the streets if there were no sports. So it's very strongly held by those who love it. So it's going to be an issue that we're going to have to deal with. I guess my own view is that eventually this structure of ever-increasing content costs and the question of how much of it can be passed along to cable consumers is like every other seemingly unsolvable or extraordinary market problem going to be fixed by technology. I don't think that this is, I do think that you'll find people with getting other ways to get sports like they have gotten other ways to get almost every other content. And I don't know exactly how that'll happen, but I do think that it's likely that it will happen. And so I think that there'll be at some point a regularization of this. Content costs are the most significant costs that you have to deal with when you're in the cable space. They do rise every year. And we spend a lot of energy trying to ensure that we get a good deal, or we expand our rights, and we can make use of the content on our great LTE network as well. So there are lots of ways that this pie gets sliced, given the fact that there's actually an array of rights that are now in play, when it used to be there was really only the rights associated with, the big TV. Now there are all sorts of different rights at play, and things are being sliced between smartphone and pads and in the house and outside the home. And so there's the further sets of discrimination that you can, or further sets of rights that get sliced up, is an opportunity to get more value for what you're paying for. So it is a significant problem. I don't think I have any answer that will do it. Although I do have faith in technology that it will at some point hold this current model up to some significant pressure.
Okay. I want to thank Randy for a great talk.
Thank you.